going to your bank or lender, sometimes they don't give you the proper advice to help you improve your ratios. And sometimes it's very easy, right? Sometimes there's just little things that if you knew these little tidbits that could really help you go a long ways.
Welcome to the Commonwealth Home Ownership Podcast, the real estate investing podcast for Canadians. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, you've come to the right place. If you're looking for a way to take control of your life through real estate investing, stay tuned and be sure to join us at cwho.ca, your hub for all things real estate investing in Canada.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Commonwealth Home Ownership Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm Phil Wong. With me as always is Brad Price, and joining us again is Kim Nguyen. How's it going, Kim?
Good, guys. How are you?
Excellent.
We're good.
Yeah, let's give a few quick updates though. I mean, Brad, he is now slowly or quickly relocating to BC. How's that coming along?
Yeah, big news, I guess. Well, we're making a move here. Yeah, end of this month. So what are we now? We're start of October.
Mm-hmm.
So by the end of the month, we'll be relocated up to the Sunshine Coast of BC.
Excellent. That's exciting, man. Best of luck there.
New challenges, new beginnings.
Yeah, man. We're gonna sad that you're not in Calgary anymore. That's gonna be I'm gonna miss you, man.
Well, it's funny though, isn't it? Because I mean, for the amount of time that we actually see each other in person,
probably won't make a difference, really. But
no,
I'll still feel the same.
We're all so busy that this is our typical form of communication these days. So we'll make do. Yeah. So what about you, Phil? I know you've got some exciting news coming up, buddy.
Yeah.
I know, the words serial entrepreneurs get used all the time, and it's probably overused these days, but here we go again.
Yeah, I mean, today was a big day, actually. Today is my last day at my job for a while. And I'm opening up my Botox injection clinic, Arlo Medical Injections. So that'll be exciting. I'm looking forward to getting that up and running. So
yeah. Congratulations, buddy. That's exciting news.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I should be opening next week. So by the time you guys hear this might actually be open. So
it'll be open.
like me on Facebook. Come check out the clinic. It's pretty cool.
Right on.
Thanks.
So Kim, how are you keeping? You're busy these days. Are we still in a wild world of buying and selling and mortgages applications?
Oh yeah, it's been happening. So with my side, it's still been super busy. I feel like it still hasn't stopped, right? I know for some, it may, like just from talking to other colleagues, some realtors in the market, they have seen a little bit of a slowdown, but for me, I feel like it's just been constant still, which is really good. Everyone still feels the green shoots. Everyone still has a lot of optimism here, which is good. That's what keeps everything rolling forward and forward and forward. So not much has really stopped. And the good thing too is in terms of rates, that's also a contributing factor because rates have been so low and it still has remained low, hasn't really changed much. That's also another driving factor as to why the market hasn't stopped, right? People are finding the opportunities. They're saying that, okay, rates are still low. I'm getting pretty decent price. I might as well just buy right now. So it's been good.
Speaking of rates, Kim, where are they sitting right now in terms of variable and fixed?
Yeah, so if we're looking at rates, so again, it just depends on, so obviously when it comes to rates, lenders do it differently where they will give certain pricing for insured mortgages. So those, again, are mortgages with less than 20% down. Or if you're doing 20% down or more, you'll get a different set of rates. So those are usually conventional rates. So when we're looking in the realm of the insured rates, if we're looking for like a 5-year fix, again, there's still lenders offering as low as 1.74%. Okay. So it starts from there on the insured side. Now, when we're creeping up to the conventional side, there are some lenders that have had that rate as well too, but right now we're sitting more in the 1.94 range. That's typical. So that's what you should be seeing in the market right now. On the variable side, though, this is where the real savings come in. So on the insured side, there are lenders offering as low as 0.99. Okay. So again, for insured, 0.99, less than 1%. So you heard that. But keep in mind, though, with low rates, you can't be picky and choosy with the lender, right? And you can't be picky and choosy with their service, but 0.99 is out there. I would say the norm, though, should be 1.19% for a 5-year variable. And again, it's all insured. So when we jump into the conventional side, that just jumps up a little bit higher. So then we're going to be looking at 1.29.
Still
pretty good in my opinion, right? Like you can't complain. There was once upon a time, I think, like guys, rewind like 3 years ago, we were like in the threes. So
that wasn't even that long ago.
It wasn't, yeah. So it just keeps going down. So all right.
That's insane. I don't think I've ever seen interest rates this low ever.
Yeah.
That's
And I
crazy.
feel like I say it all the time, right? When we get to the low twos, at one point in time, I'm like, I don't think rates have been in the low twos, and then I don't think rates have gone below 2. But here we are, rates are going below 1. It's crazy.
That's insane. It's
Wow.
practically free money.
Yeah, pretty much.
I had a mortgage that came up, and to be honest, just because of everything going on and how busy things have been, I ran out of time to actually go and refinance the property. So I ended up having to go through and just renew, but I haggled through the renewal, and I pushed and got it elevated as far as I could get it, to the point where we ended up in the 1.2s.
Yeah.
Nice.
To be honest with you, I think it was about 3 or 4 days before the renewal date. So it was really, really last minute. And you know what? I guess they could have kind of pushed back a bit, but they didn't. And we got a really, really good variable rate in the 1.2. So, I mean, you know what? It worked out pretty well in the end.
Totally.
Cool. Well, Kim, so I think for today, I think we should maybe take a little step back. And I know some of this stuff as it relates to, purchasers buying starter homes and whatnot, we've kind of touched on some of this stuff in the past, but I think it would be a really good exercise to maybe dive into a little bit more detail surrounding some of the myths and whatnot that get kicked around, that you can borrow, 5 times your income, or is it 3 times your income, and is it the house value or is it the mortgage value? And if we can maybe jump into some of those myths and talk about those, and maybe the debt servicing ratios, and exactly what are the banks looking for these days when people buying starter homes. And when we do talk about starter homes, what price ranges are we talking? Because obviously across the country, there's going to be different price ranges for starter homes and what we consider a starter home.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces to this. And I think where we should really start off with is, what are banks looking at when you come into a bank and you're looking to get a mortgage, you're looking to buy your first home? What are the qualifying criteria? What do they care about? And obviously we all know that they're taking a look at your income, they're taking a look at your credit, they're taking a look at your debts. But what is the actual formula? And the most important thing is that you need to understand that most banks are looking at 2 sets of ratios, which is the first one being your gross debt servicing ratio, so known as your GDS, and the second one being your total debt servicing ratio, so TDS, right? So I'll refer to that interchangeably. But essentially what that really means is, when the bank is reviewing to see how much you qualify for, they're making sure that only a percentage of your annual income goes towards these debts. So there's a certain percentage that's allowed to go towards your housing debts, and there's a certain percentage that's allowed to go towards your overall debts. So if you're buying a home, generally the rule of thumb is that only 39% of your annual income can go towards your housing debt. Okay. And then if you have other credit cards or like car loans or whatnot, that plus the housing cost, only 44% of your annual income can go towards that. And that's essentially what lenders are looking for. So that's really, it kind of, I hear that myth all the time where people are like, Kim, I know that to buy a home, it's usually 4 times my income. Well, it's not as simple as just taking your income timesing it by 4. It's not that simple because there's so many other variables in play, because do you have other additional debts? If you have some additional debts, that will also impact the calculations. On top of that too, what's your down payment? Because if you're doing a larger down payment, like if you're doing 20% down, then you're actually allowed to qualify for a bit more, because we can actually use a 30-year amortization to help you qualify. So, so many different things, guys.
Quick question, Kim. Sorry. So can you repeat those GDS and TDS percentages again?
Yeah, so with GDS, usually it's between, I say 39, and this is assuming that you have good credit, okay? That's another factor. If you've got poor credit, then it scales back a little bit to about 36, sometimes even lower, depending on the lender. But usually I would say the range is anywhere between 36 to 39, give or take, right?
Okay.
Sometimes there are exceptions, so always remember, like, these are just kind of rough guidelines, but yeah, like depending on the client, depending on, you know, the strength of the application and the lender too, some of them will allow us to go higher than that.
Because last year I remember CMHC actually pared down their increased the strictness of their requirements, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, they did. Yeah. And that was one of them. So they dropped down a little bit lower. But the thing is too, is you know, if you have an insured mortgage and you're kind of tight, that's why you have the other 2 insurers in Canada to go to instead of CMHC.
Yeah, I think CMHC was 35, I believe, for GDS and 41 for TDS, correct?
Yes, no, it was 35. Again, depending on your credit score as well too. So yes, that was kind of the range that they were looking at.
Okay.
And to be clear, Kim, are these percentages that we're talking about, are they a hard and fast rule, or are they different from lender to lender?
So typically, if it's a down payment that's less than 20%, it's a hard and fast rule, right? But again, it will differ between insurers as well too. So that's the other funny thing. But usually when you're doing 20% or more, that's when we're playing in the conventional space. So when it's the conventional space, it's you're working directly with the lender and their policies. So they will have room for exceptions. Granted, it makes sense to make the exception, but just know that if it's less than 20%, it is a little bit more strict. But if it's 20% or more, flexible. It really can be flexible.
How does it?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, Phil. How does it work, Kim, if you're meeting these percentage ranges, but you already own a property? How does that play a part in your debt servicing?
Yeah, so, and this is where it kind of gets complicated, because I know I have a lot of clients that will, you know, like they'll say, Kim, you know, I have an existing home already and I'm looking to buy like a rental property, or maybe they're looking to buy a new home and convert their existing home to a rental property. How do banks view that, right? Especially if you have existing, you know, mortgages and stuff. How does that play into the whole mix? And it really, again, it goes back to the fact of it depends on the lender that you go to, because in the scenario where, let's say you're buying a new home to move into and your existing home is going to be converted to a rental, there's certain lenders that will actually take your existing home and they will, you know, because it's going to be converted to a rental, all they require is essentially a lease agreement to show exactly how much you're going to be renting it out for. Either that, if you don't have it, either that, or you can get a fair market rent report, which is like an appraisal report done by an appraiser, just saying that, hey, if your home was to be converted to a rental, how much would it be rented out for? But essentially what they would do is they would take that figure. So let's say you're going to rent your home out for $2,000 a month and your mortgage payments, your existing mortgage payments, $1,500. They would just do a direct wash. Of course, they would include other things such as, you know, property tax, utilities. Again, like that calculation is different from lender to lender, but they would just basically take the income that you're expected to get from the home and subtract all expenses, and whatever that figure is, whether it's a positive number or a negative. If it's a positive, sometimes they just add that back into your income, or they just consider it a wash. So on your actual ratios, it's a complete wash. It doesn't impact you at all. But if there's a negative, like let's say you're losing money from this conversion, then they would add that as like a reoccurring debt. They treat it as if, it's a credit card debt, right? Think of it that way. It's a liability. It's something that every single month you're going to have to make a payment to, and you need to be able to support that.
And if you make that 1.2 debt coverage ratio or 1.1 debt coverage ratio, like, do you need to make that to consider it a wash, or will it, we'll get into the 1.0 be enough?
It again depends on the lender, right? So some lenders are very strict where they have to have a 1.1, super, super strict guidelines. But there's other ones where they're kind of flexible. If it's a little bit lower than that, they're okay as long as your income is enough to service that debt, right? If every month, from you leaving your home as a rental every month, you're going to be short $100. As long as your income is enough to service that $100, there are some lenders that don't care. They'll be like, yeah, that's fine. Even though you're negative, that's not a problem because your income is very strong. Like you can still support it.
Okay.
So let's break this right down into as much detail as we can. So when the banks are doing these calculations, and we're talking about debt coverage ratio of the property itself, and we're talking about the income it generates from the rent to cover the expenses. So what are the expenses that the banks and maybe we can be a little bit broad in this sense because some of them probably vary, but what are the exact expenses? And the reason I ask this is because there are many expenses that relate to a property. Sure. And there are different scenarios whereby sometimes you might pay utilities as the landlord and sometimes you may not. So what do the banks consider as expenses and how do they break that down?
Yeah. So the main things that I would say, and again, too, this is speaking broadly, right? Because there's some banks that, they could care less about property tax. Like, to be honest with you, in their rental worksheet or the way that they analyze rentals, they don't even care about your property tax, right? So again, there are some nuances with certain lenders, but the generic expense list that we would be looking at would be your mortgage payment, right? That is an expense that every lender will take a look at. The second one too is they'll always include some type of percentage for vacancy. Usually that percentage will vary from lender to lender, but it can go anywhere between 4 to 6% is what I've seen, right? Another thing that they'll have to put in there too would be like a preset amount for maintenance and repairs. And usually, again, that amount is about $1,200 per unit or whatever is greater. So if you have, like, if this is a rental property that you've had for years or something that you claim on your income taxes, they'll usually go off of that to see what you've actually declared and use that figure. But usually it's either the greater of, right? $1,200 a unit or what's actually reported on your tax return. Insurance is another cost that they'll take into consideration. Property tax too, but as you know, again, it depends. Utilities is another one too. But of course, if you already have a lease agreement in place and on your lease, it says that, the tenants are responsible for the entire utilities, they'll deduct that, right? They won't consider that because they can see that in the rent amount, you're not covering it at all. Like your tenant's taking care of it. So those are kind of the main things that you would want to take a look at and consider as expense.
Okay.
Good to know.
So another question about the TDS as well, because I know that some banks, they're a little bit more strict when calculating TDS based on if you have any lines of credits, correct?
Yes, yeah, it is very true. Like when it comes to TDS calculation, and oftentimes I'll get clients that say, "Hey Kim, I'm coming to you because my bank said my ratios were tight, but I have no idea why. Like I don't know why it is, right? Like help me understand that." And sometimes the main difference could be the liabilities that you have, because there are certain banks where if you have a line of credit, even though, and I'm talking about a home equity line of credit, okay? There's certain banks that if you have a home equity line of credit, and let's say you don't even owe anything on it, you don't even owe a penny on it, right? Just because you have it, there's certain banks that will consider you having like using the full limit because you have access to it, and they will actually count that towards your overall ratios. So sometimes that's a negative, because if you owe nothing on that line of credit, it's just open, just for emergency use, there's certain lenders that will consider the full limit just because you have it readily available. Whereas on the other hand, there will be some banks that say, yes, we see that you have that line of credit, but we don't care, you don't have a balance owing on it, so you know what, that counts as zero, right? So those are kind of like the nuances that you want to take a look at. Another thing too would be unsecured lines of credit. So a neat tip that many consumers don't know is that if you have an unsecured line of credit, if your limit is less than 50,000, usually if you have a balance owing on there, you're usually paying interest only, which is very minimal, right? But the way that most lenders will look at it is they take the balance owing and they use 3%, and that's actually the payment that they use for qualification. But where it gets interesting is if your line of credit that's actually above 50,000, there's some lenders that will use a benchmark payment for you instead of that 3%. So it actually makes it a little bit easier for you to qualify.
Sorry, so if your balance on an unsecured line of credit is more than 50,000, then it might be easier to qualify because they don't use the 3% limit.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the strangest thing.
But 3% on an unsecured line of credit is also relatively low, is it not?
No, it's quite high. Like if you really think about it, right? It's if you've got a 50,000, so for every 10,000 that you
Wait, are you talking about owing or limit? You're talking about like
owing.
Okay.
Yes, owing. So that's why, like, the thing that you have to remember is that when it comes to getting a line of credit, an unsecured line of credit, the trick is really like if you don't have a balance on it, then you're pretty much in the clear with most banks, right? They don't count that against you. You've got this line of credit, but again, they don't factor that in when they're reviewing to see how much you actually qualify for. What is your total debt servicing ratio? They don't care, right? But the moment that you have balances on there, that's where it gets kind of tricky because they use 3%. The only exception to that is if your limit is above 50,000, then it's different.
What is the average unsecured line of credit rate? Because I can't think of any ones that I have. Actually, no, I do have one that I have. But otherwise, most of them are above 3%. So I'm surprised that 3% is the benchmark rate, because I feel like most of them are above 3%.
Yeah, no, like it's 3% of the balance owing, right? So if you have the 10,000, if you're owing 10,000 on your line of credit, most likely your payment is going to be lower than 3%, than the 3%, which is $300. Because when I'm calculating on my side, I'm using 3% of that balance, which is a monthly payment of $300. But in the reality though, if you've got a line of credit 10,000, usually your monthly payments is maybe $100.
Sorry, 3% monthly you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, so I was thinking 3% yearly. I was like, 3% yearly is not nearly that bad.
It's not that bad. Yeah. No, it makes it really unfavorable, totally unfavorable. That's why, like, clients, I see, like, one of the common things I see is I have a lot of clients who will get lines of credit to consolidate debt. Right? They're like, I just got this line of credit, like consolidate my credit card debts because it's a lower interest rate, all of this stuff. If that is the situation, it's almost better that you get a debt consolidation loan and you amortize it over a long period of time. Because the way that lenders review loans is whatever your actual loan payment is, that is what they will use for qualification purposes. But if it's open as a line of credit, they use 3% of whatever is like the balance is, right? Whereas if you have a loan and if your monthly payments are $80 a month, that is what they will use to help qualify.
Okay. So it's almost really, they're looking at you having a 36% yearly interest rate on your line of credit.
Almost, yeah. If you want to break it down that way, it's not the greatest. That's why ratios are generally pretty tight when you've got unsecured lines of credit.
Wow. Okay. So once you're above 50,000, is there a set benchmark about how banks calculate your interest?
Yeah, so the way that they would calculate it is if, let's say, your line of credit limit is over 50,000, okay? they will use whatever the balance is owing. So let's say you owe 10,000 on it, right? And let's say your line of credit limit is 60. Okay, I'll just use that as an example. The 10,000, they will actually amortize it over 25 years, and they'll use the stress test, which today is 5.25. And whatever that payment is, that's what the payment that they're going to use as your monthly debt obligation payment.
Wow, that is much more reasonable. Wow.
It is. So again, not all lenders do this. Like there's a good handful that do it, but it is one of those things, right? Like if you're going to get a line of credit, try to up the limit if you can, because again, it could help you out in qualifying, or better yet, just have that line of credit and just don't use it, right? I know, just have it for emergency.
As a rule of thumb, as a real estate investor, anytime anyone offers me credit, I just say yes.
Yes.
Right? And I think that goes against conventional wisdom with a lot of people too, especially if you're not in the real estate investing game for a long time and you haven't really done much of this. And most people would see that as a risk, right? Most people see that as like, oh, that's just more debt that I could take on. Whereas as a real estate investor, there are a lot of incidentals that come up that cost a lot of money, because you're dealing with an asset that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. So anything in the incidentals might cost in the tens of thousands. And not to say that you can't make it back down the road, which oftentimes you can, due to, if you just do a little bit of renovations, a little bit of fixing, or a little bit of reamortization. But having a line of credit really, really helps for those out there who are a little bit afraid of saying yes to all those credit offers. Not to mention that on top of that, also lowers the utilization ratio too.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. And you know what? I've said it before too. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this on the podcast. Utilization is everything. So, for those of you, pondering about the whole, oh, I got a pre-approved offer on my credit card to increase the limit, do it, right? So like just do it, but obviously be responsible with it. And as long as you can be responsible, it's only going to ever help you, right? But if you're the type that, you don't trust yourself, you're like, oh, if I increase this limit, I'm going to spend more, then okay, maybe you shouldn't. But if you can be responsible, it will actually really pay large dividends in your credit score. It'll help grow it quite fast.
Yeah, I mean, really, those who aren't responsible probably won't be in this game for that long. Truth be told, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Right.
So Kim, what are some of the other details that lenders are looking at over and beyond the debt servicing?
Yeah, I would say in terms of details, I would say the debt servicing, it really is a make or break, right? That's usually the biggest key in whether or not you can proceed with them. So I would say other factors, I wouldn't even really touch base on that, to be honest with you, just because if your ratios aren't good, they won't care about anything else, right? Nothing else matters at that point. Your ratios is basically the starting point, and it's the point that allows you to proceed forward, or it's a stop right away. And the one hurdle that I find though is really okay, people will get to that point where their banks will say, okay, well, you can't proceed to the next step because your ratios are so high. What can we do to drop this, right? What can we do? And oftentimes I find going to your bank or lender, sometimes they don't give you the proper advice to help you improve your ratios. And sometimes it's very easy, right? Sometimes there's just little things that if you knew these little tidbits that could really help you go a long ways. Because when it comes to mortgage financing, if your ratios are high, there's only two things that you could do. It's either you increase your income or you decrease your debt, right? Those are kind of the things that you got to look at. But the increasing income, sometimes you got to be a little bit creative around that, right? Sometimes if you don't just presenting your lender just your regular income, like a letter of employment pay stub, if they're not asking if you get bonuses or stuff like that, or additional income, and you don't tell them, you could be shooting yourself in the foot. That's why it's important for you to kind of ask these questions, right? If my ratios are tight, what can I do to improve them? Do you want to see more income that I make? Those are key things to really put forth.
Yeah, I think great. Sorry, Phil, just quickly, there's a great tip there about the loan versus the line of credit for consolidation. I think that's a really, really neat little trick to help your ratio out. So yeah, those little tidbits are very, very important and can be useful.
A couple of things. First of all, if you want to actually learn more about ratios, we actually wrote an article on our CWHO website, very creatively titled "Ratios, Ratios, Ratios," and that covers GDS, TDS, and your DCR ratios, just to give an idea, give a better explanation of what those are. But secondly, I just wanted to talk about, like, in terms of income and debt, like in terms of increasing your income and decreasing your debt. Like, I mean, decreasing your debt, there's only so far you can go, right? I mean, as far as if you're looking at ratios, you can only go so far before you can only decrease your expenses so far before you hit rock bottom, and then you that's all you can cut. But income, technically, it's infinite, how much you can grow it. I'm just curious how banks look at different sources of income, right? Because if you say you have a job, a regular job, but say you have a side gig, a side hustle of some sort, where you're technically considered self-employed, and you say you've been doing it for a couple of years, but you don't make a ton of money. Maybe you make like 20 grand a year doing this side hustle. How would they look at that?
I always say, don't underestimate the amount, like whether it's a few thousand or like 20,000, 10,000, every little bit helps. And I say that the thing is, like, especially if you have a side hustle, right? And it's very common, like, I know a lot of people who have their, full 9 to 5 job, and then on the side, they do other things, right? I have a friend who has like a 3D printing company, like it's just a hobby, right? But it's still additional income. Those kind of additional incomes, as long as it is declared on your tax return, because keep in mind, if it's a side hustle, you need 2 years worth of declared income to be able to use it. But of course, bring it up. That is still income. Or even if you do like a part-time job, like if you work somewhere, maybe you babysit or something like that. I don't know, right? I don't know what people do these days. There's so many part-time jobs out there, but if you do something and there's guaranteed hours and you can get a letter of employment or recent pay stub for it, that's also additional income that we can use. But the one thing that I find a majority of Canadians always underestimate and forget is the CCB income. So if you have kids, if you have children, utilize them, right? You're getting the Canada Child Benefit. Of course, it doesn't seem like much. Maybe it's a couple hundred a month, but again, every little bit helps. Every little bit counts. So that is additional income that most lenders would actually recognize. That, and of course, like sweet income is a huge one too. Like if your home has the potential to have a basement suite where you can rent it off, it's non-conforming, that's income as well too. That's income we can definitely add on.
Even if it's non-conforming.
Yep, certain lenders only right now. So again, it's very, very common in BC, and even in the GTA, the Toronto area, Greater Toronto area, there's a lot of non-conforming suites, right? Of course, they're not legal suites, but they're non-conforming. There are lenders that will be okay with that. Now, here in Alberta, we're a little bit more strict here, but there's still, I would say there's still probably a good chunk of lenders that will still consider it. Of course, you got to keep in mind though, because their policies are so flexible, sometimes you're going to be giving up something else, and that could be interest rate, right? They may not have the best rates, but their policies are pretty damn good, especially since they'll consider non-conforming suite income.
And is this non-conforming suites related to principal residence only, or are we talking investment properties?
Investment properties, yes. Investment properties, primary residence, yeah. It's just like I had mentioned though, in Alberta, it's unfortunate because again, in like the GVA, Greater Vancouver area, GTA, Greater Toronto area, a lot of lenders recognize that there are tons of non-conforming suites. They get that. It's super normal there because of the, like I said, just because of the whole housing crisis that's happening over there, lenders get that. But here in Alberta, that's where it gets kind of tricky because they're like, we don't really have much of a housing crisis here. So we like things to be proper. We like legal suited homes, right? But again, there are still occasional lenders that will consider non-conforming suites.
If it's a non-conforming suite inside your own home, I'm assuming to prove that you need a lease, yes?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Okay. So you can't just have your brother staying with you and...
No, you need a lease. If you don't have a lease, again, too, the fair market rent assessment is also something that most lenders will recognize too.
Okay, awesome. And let's move on to starter homes, because I know that's getting a little bit more difficult, especially in Calgary and Alberta, like with prices increasing. I mean, we're probably one of the last places where we can still reasonably afford a starter home for a regular person, but who doesn't have where the average house price is still reasonable. But with house prices going up recently in the last several months, with the average single detached home in the between $400,000 to $500,000 now, what is the income that you need to, or average income that you need to actually be able to afford or qualify for a starter home nowadays?
So again, like so many factors behind this, right? Like if we're talking about somebody who has like a good solid down payment, so let's say they've got, at least saved up like the 5% down, they don't have any debts. Usually like within that range, I would say anywhere between 80 to 100 is kind of the range that we're looking at, right? Because there's so many other factors involved too. This is assuming that they have stellar credit as well too. And like those little things add up, right? Of course, that threshold goes down if, let's say, they have a higher down payment. So if, let's say, they can come up with a 20% down payment and we can use a 30 years to help qualify, then that drops down a little bit lower. Maybe we can get away with someone earning about like, 80 to 90,000, right? Give or take, if that was the situation. But that's kind of the rule of thumb that I would look at. And another thing that changes too is with those starter homes, there's a lot of homes, again, in Alberta, I'm sure you guys have seen it too. The new trend right now that I'm seeing with a lot of my first time buyers is they want suited homes. They want that home where they can rent out the basement. It's a mortgage helper. And if that is the case, then your income requirements will also lower, because if the home has a legal suite, I can use that income to help you qualify. So that will also change up the dynamics. But rule of thumb though, I would say for that price point, just to keep it easy numbers, I guess, relatively easy figures to remember, 80 to 100 is what we're looking at.
Okay, so you need at least 80 grand just to, and that's per household, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So that's combined income. So that's like husband and wife and brother and sister.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's gross, correct, Kim?
Correct. Yes. Yes. So another common thing too is a lot of people think that it's their net pay that banks are looking at. Absolutely not. We look at your gross income.
Even if it is how about for self-employed?
Self-employed, it would just be, so this is where it gets a little different when it's self-employed. What we're then looking at would be your net income. So it would be, so there's two types, right? If you're a sole proprietor, we would take a look at your net business income that's declared on your personal tax return. But if you are incorporated, you have the option of paying yourself a T4 or a T5, which is like dividends. And we would just essentially look at whatever you paid yourself there.
Okay. So yeah, so for an employed person, gross income; for self-employed, net income.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why if you are, sole proprietor, and when we're looking at net income, if you're planning to buy a home that year, it might be beneficial for you to kind of limit the expenses that you write off just to kind of boost up that number a little bit more, just to give you a little bit more extra buying power, right? Maybe you don't need to write off absolutely everything. Of course, it is a perk to being self-employed, but again, too, it can hurt your financing if you're claiming way too much, right? Then it looks like your bottom line, you have nothing.
Actually, sorry, I just want to go back a little bit. I forgot to ask this earlier. In terms of rental income, how do banks look at that? Do they take all 100% of the rental income as to put towards your income, or do they take a small percentage?
It depends. So like when it comes to rental income, it is an offset, right? So most banks, like what they will do is it's kind of off of the table. It's almost an offset. Like, so as I mentioned, they're really taking a look at your property's DCR. So realistically, it's not like they're adding that income to your total income. It's not like, okay, Phil, you've got an income, let's say 50,000, and you've got, with all your rentals and stuff, that's an additional 10,000 worth of income. So now your income's 60,000. No, it doesn't work that way. The way that they would look at it is based on your rental portfolio, they would just basically offset that income with the expenses. So whatever money coming in, it would then be, we would then subtract all the expenses, and then that's essentially what they would look at, right? And if that number is positive, that gets added back to your income, or sometimes it'll just be a wash. But if the number is negative, then it gets added as if it was a debt, a liability.
Okay, but I guess in essence, it's still affects your GDS or TDS the same way, whether or not it adds to your income or subtracts your expenses.
Definitely, yeah, it still does, because if you have a deficit, right?
Yeah.
If you've got like a shortfall of $100, like think of it this way: it's like you have a, you know, a loan that you have to pay every month for $100.
And then in terms of, I mean, we talked about the TDS and GDS with the larger, or with the sort of larger lenders. What about the monoline and B lenders? Is it the same percentage rates for those guys? Do they have their own criteria that they work within?
Yeah, that's a great question. And with monoline lenders, it is generally the same as the big banks. But when it comes to B lenders, that's where the world is your oyster. So it actually gets expanded a lot. And some B lenders will even go up to as high as 60% TDS. Like, it's unheard of. It's crazy. Wow. But of course, there's a price to pay for it, right? Same thing with private lenders. Private lenders, if you're kind of concerned about your ratios, and I have a lot of clients that are self-employed that are in this position. If you are concerned about your ratio, maybe going towards a private lender may make sense, because with them, they don't care about ratios. It's all about the equity stake in the home, right? They could care less if your income is good, bad. They could care less about your credit. For them, it's just all about the equity stake, but you're paying a price for it. It's private lending. So just know that your interest rates won't be in the ones, that's for sure. It's not going to be in the twos either. It's going to be of upwards of seven or more, right? With fees, heavy fees attached. But yeah, when we're stepping it down a notch though to the B lending side, it's just the GDS and TDS ratios do get extended further than your traditional like 40s, right? It can go up to the 60s if needed.
Yeah, it's good to know that there are other options out there, albeit that everything has a price.
Totally, yeah.
There are other options.
Okay, well, I mean, just being cognizant of time here, what if you could just kind of summarize what today's major lessons are, like what would they be?
Yeah, I think major lessons, like I guess the takeaways from this chat anyways, is that when you're going to apply for financing, and if ever you're finding that your ratios are tight, or if a lender is saying that your ratios are tight, you know, just ask them to work through it, right? And just make sure that you are disclosing absolutely all details that you humanly can when it comes to income, right? That is usually the first thing that a lot of clients forget to do. Like little things such as adding your Canada Child Benefit, even though it's a couple $100s a month, makes a huge difference, right? It can make or break your deal. And then when it comes to debts, you know, be mindful of that as well too. If there's any opportunities for you to, you know, amortize lines of credit into loan payments, take advantage of that. If there's anything that you can do where if you've co-signed for a loan that really isn't your loan, maybe at that time point, it's time for you to ship it back to the person who it rightfully belongs to, right? Little things like that can really help you get one step closer to qualifying.
All right, Kim. Well, thank you for joining us again. And hopefully things stay busy for you, actually, as far as things go. So it looks like things aren't going to slow down anytime soon, with the mortgage rates being an all-time low, and the market's still keeping pace as far as I can tell.
For sure.
So
keeping up the momentum.
Yeah, next spring will be interesting for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, good to see you again, Kim, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Commonwealth Home Ownership Podcast. Be sure to check out all of our past episodes and our ever-growing library of content at cwho.ca. Until next time, remember to get out there, take action, and create a life of wealth by design.